in terms of if I was to view misclassification as fraud, I would say that a few things. One is most mistakes that people make, whether it's in construction or other industries, but mostly construction, are really not intentional. You got a bunch of small business people, folks who don't know anything about workers' compensation. 90% of them call it workman's comp. They have so many other things that they're trying to do in their daily life. So to try to figure out and make sure that they've punched the right button and coded the right code and come up with the right classification, I think is and then assuming that, always dangerous, that they did this for some nefarious purpose, I don't think is fair. We sort of jump to assumptions and say, oh, you didn't do this correctly, therefore it was intentional, and therefore it is fraud. I'm no attorney, but I think fraud there has to be some intent there. It can be antagonistic if people jump to those assumptions. In other words, that they say, oh, this small business person or this contractor or this bid, there's clearly some misclassification going on there. And as I mentioned, jumping to those assumptions is fundamentally unfair. And then again, finally, from an antagonistic perspective, when we assume that other people's purposes are poor or unethical, we put them in a box, and it's really difficult for them to get out of that box. Instead, I think it's really important to just assume the best with people most of the time, unless they give you some clear, concrete reason to believe otherwise. And I really appreciate you focusing on the solution. The first thing is put yourself in their shoes. Try to understand even a little bit what their daily life is like, what that process looks like. Ask them how they went about making that decision. Ask them to tell you, okay, well, we did this and this and this, and this is how we arrived at that. I think that'll be illuminating for everybody. It'll also give you a chance to provide some education to folks where you think there may be some misclassification going on. Education that is going to help everybody. It'll strengthen your relationship with them. It'll certainly help them see you in a positive light as an advocate, and it'll also help their organization going forward. Part and parcel of that is to provide for regulators, for insurance companies, for brokers, to provide very clear, very simple guidance. Do not tell them to refer to this law or that law or go to this page or that page. Write it out in simple monosyllabic terms, 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. For us to expect that other people will understand insurance terms, I think is grossly unfair. And then finally, I want to pound this one into the ground. Don't assume that because somebody has done something that you think may be inappropriate, that was intentional. Really try to understand. Now, there's no question some people do want to commit fraud. Some people do want to take advantage. Some people do want to screw their employees, but I think most don't. Now, those who do, drop the bomb on them. Those who don't drop the bomb on them.
I'm going to focus in on the construction industry because that's what I know. But there are other industries with the same problem. I have to recognize that. And I know for us, when workers are misclassified as independent contractors, they lose a lot of workplace protections and safety nets. They lose overtime, they lose wage payments, they lose safety protections and workers' compensation. And on top of that, law-abiding employers are underbid and lose work because the bad guys that break the law are shaving up to 30% or more off their labor costs. Taxpayers lose. In state and federal taxes, or losses amount to about $8.4 billion a year. And workers' compensation carriers also lose. They lose about $2 billion a year because of fraud in the construction industry. Certainly, I can't be absolute, and I can't say that every instance of misclassification is intentional. There are well-meaning employers who do get confused about legal definitions of employment, especially small, unsophisticated construction employers. But certainly, when you say to your insurance broker that you have a $90,000 payroll when it's really $4 million, that's fraud. When you use shell company names on checks, you cash at money service businesses and pay workers in cash and don't report that payroll, that's fraud. When you get an insurance agent to issue 450 certificates of insurance for your 4-person construction outfit, that's fraud. When you participate in cash payment schemes to launder money for organized crime and drug cartels, that's fraud. When you falsify currency transaction reports, that's fraud. When you threaten injured workers with deportation, if they seek medical treatment, that not only indicates fraud, it indicates labor trafficking. People of goodwill who understand the negative economic consequences of fraud, who care about abiding by the law, who care about having a social safety net, and who care about the dignity of work can join together. That would include employers, unions, and other employee representatives, insurance companies, policymakers, and law enforcement agencies. And from time to time, we've actually seen that done. An example of that is in the state of Tennessee, where there's been cooperation from every segment to improving law enforcement in that state on workers' compensation coverage requirements. So it can be done, and I know my organization is always open to that type of collaboration with well-meaning people.